guys, TazzyPhe here. How is it going? So, although I grew up in the US and spent the majority of my life here, I definitely did not have the average American academic experience. And that's because from the ages of 3 to 17, I went to religiously affiliated private schools. From preschool until 8th grade, I went to a private Islamic school. And then after that, I went to an all-girls Catholic high school. And it wasn't until college that I finally experienced a huge secular public university. And that was quite a cultural shock for me because it was very different than the environment that I started in, which was the Islamic school. So in today's video, I'm going to talk about my experience going to an Islamic school in the 90s/early 2000s here in the US. Honestly, school is a loose term. It was more like a daycare for Muslim immigrant children. Although we're not slandering here, okay? A lot has changed since then. Muslim communities have made strides, and that school is not the same place that it was when I went there when I was little. It's infinitely better. It's an actual school now, so don't sue me, okay? Some of you might be like, wow, Tazzy, that explains a lot. Now I understand why you're so strange. Yeah, well, we're going to talk about it. I'm going to talk about what it was like going to that school, what that experience left me with, why I was sent there. Was I brainwashed? What was it like? What did I love? What did I hate? Would I send my own future children to an Islamic school? Yeah. We'll see. But a little bit of background and context before we get into it. So when we're talking about the US, most Americans don't send their kids to private schools. I actually found the statistic that in 2020, 11.1 million students were enrolled in private schools compared to 63.2 enrolled in public schools. And for those of you who don't know, public schools are paid by taxes, so there's no fee for children to attend, whereas private schools cost a lot of money and you have to pay tuition. So it makes sense that a lot less people would attend the latter. And right now in the US, there's a lot of controversy about what's being taught in public schools. We could take Florida, for example. There are now laws against the teaching of race, sexual orientation, and gender, and there's been like book bans in various school districts. Even in higher education, the governor is rolling back diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, reducing tenure protections, and moving school leaders to review core courses to make sure they're free of liberal indoctrination. So the Florida Department of Education has approved the conservative education platform PragerU. It's a controversial platform because on its site, it's like this nonprofit focused on a free alternative to the dominant left-wing ideology and culture and media and education. It seems like in US public schools, it's about left-right, like that's, but people are upset because Prager University has been known to spread misinformation, biased stuff for public schools. Like some of the content has titles like, was the Civil War about slavery? The inconvenient truth about the Democratic Party? Is Islam a religion of peace? Make masculine men again left-wing, right-wing, and it's bleeding into the education system. But I digress. We're talking about my experience. So the reason that I was sent to private school, I actually texted my mom and she's so cute. This is what she said. But parents often opt for private religious schools because they want their kids to learn in an environment that matches their faith and values. So if you're considering someone who moves all the way here from another part of the world, it's a way for them to hang on to some of the things that they left. And it gives them this feeling that they can like preserve what's important to them. Because when people overseas in Muslim countries think of the US or Europe, they're like moral degeneracy. But really though, these schools offer like tight-knit community where everyone's on the same page and, when it comes to the things that matter to them. And I guess it just depends where you live and all that stuff. But yeah. So to address the first thing, was I brainwashed? Honestly, in some things I would say yes. In some things I would say no. I'll talk about it later in the video with some nuance. Like I definitely didn't agree with some of the approaches or teachings, but I feel like overall the argument that it's unethical to raise kids in a religious community or teach them religion at all is stupid. I think it's important to distinguish between like legitimate religious education that encourages understanding, personal growth, and like indoctrination that limits intellectual freedom and choice. And I think if I said that there was like absolutely no indoctrination, that would be a huge lie. Like there were definitely ideas and things that were pushed onto me that completely lacked any critical thinking or exploration of ideas. But I don't feel like my experience at that school was all the way on one side of the pendulum. And to be fair, brainwashing happens everywhere 24/7. Like I feel like we're being brainwashed by everything. Like I literally see so much stuff on TikTok and I just believe it instantly.
We are all very brainwashed from the moment we're born. One great example is how we sing the happy birthday song. Have you thought about it? It's not good content. Happy birthday to you. It didn't take a lot of intelligence to write it.
Like I was also taught that celebrating birthdays are haram, okay, at that school. So think what you will. Moving on to like what it was actually like. So the school had a very small vibe. Like, for example, when I was in 8th grade, there were only 8 people in the class. And it was this building that was an old, dingy office space that was converted into a school. So there weren't like lockers and sprawling gyms like, in American movies. It definitely had its own unique charm. Charm is a very nice word. Let's not say that. Let's say aesthetic. Okay. Like this was the school bus that we rolled in for field trips. It was a good time. Hey, good memories, good times. Classes wise, we had regular subjects like math, science, language arts, social studies. But on top of that, we had Arabic and Quran classes. So, what did I love about it? That's what we're going to get into. So one of my favorite things about the school was the sheer amount of ethnic diversity I grew up around. Like where I lived in the US in the 90s, even now, it's not a very diverse place. But I want to say that like literally everyone in my classes were from different countries. A lot of people are mixed. And leaving that school is probably one of the most difficult things because the lack of diversity in the environment I went on to was something that was, it was challenging. There wasn't diversity in terms of religion, which is something that like obviously I had to explore after I left that school. Also, I think majority of the kids and teachers were from the Arab world. So it probably could have been even more diverse, but still, I really do feel like I had this unique experience and understanding of different cultures that your average American kid wouldn't have gotten or has to be exposed to. The other thing that I really liked was the friends that I made. When it comes to immigrant families, I feel like there's 3 types, okay? There's the immigrant family that brings their whole village over to the States and they have very strong family ties. They probably don't even mix that much with people outside of family. Like they're like 2 separate categories, right? And then there's those who leave their home countries but make an effort or also have the financial ability to keep going back and keep that connection with their relatives and roots. And then there's the people who migrate alone and see their family like once in a decade. So what going to this school did was give me friendships with people who are literally like my family. My best friends in the whole entire world are people I went to school with. We hazed each other. We bullied one another. Like I actually don't even understand why we're still friends or how. But really though, since I left that school, I have not made any bonds or friendships as strong as the ones that I have with these people that I consider my sisters. And I do think it has something to do with that shared experience, like how integrated you become into community and each other's families. So this may have nothing to do with it being an Islamic school, but I did notice this difference between Muslim kids who like go to an Islamic school for a really long time and make these strong bonds and those that don't. I also noticed that like my siblings kind of had a similar experience to me and they have those friendships as well. You make these like lifelong friendships that's rooted in an identity and the similar life experience. And I think what bonds a lot of us is that we know that when we're with each other, the mask can just come off. We can be ourselves without having to explain or defend who we are or like put ourselves in a particular context. So that's one of the things that I absolutely love and I like take with me to this day. So the next positive thing, it's a double-edged sword, identity. We're going to talk about the good part of it, the positive side of identity that going to that Islamic school gave me. I think as human beings, identity is a big part of our human experience. Like how we label ourselves, we're constantly forced to do that. And it can be a bit more taxing on those who are minorities in their society because I think there's a lot that goes into that and there's a lot of different feelings and pressures that you have around that. And I think I've really embraced this part of myself instead of denying it. Like I don't reject it, right? I don't ever like deny that I'm Muslim or that my parents are from a certain place unless I'm trying to make a statement. Like, why do you keep asking me where I'm from? Are you trying to say something? Just kidding. And I think sometimes like, things like religious trauma or bad experiences in the community can get in the way of that. But I think one thing that like for me, like I've always presented myself as Muslim and I don't hide it. And I think going to an Islamic school helps you be proud of that in a place where you're definitely pushed to feel the other way about it, like embarrassed or ashamed of being Muslim because you're around people who are telling you that it's a good thing and that it's normal. And I think when you grow up in the US, that's something that people actually need to tell you because the standard, the baseline is definitely the opposite. Now, the next thing that I really liked that's a good thing is the community. And I talked about this a little bit, but I think as human beings, we're hardwired to want to be in communities. And that's what going to an Islamic school gives Muslim families in the US. Like we are living in this hyper individualistic suburban nightmare that's keeping us isolated and depressed. I will say there's a dark side to being part of a community. So, there's that, but I do want to talk about the good. I was actually reflecting on this the other day because I didn't grow up with a lot of extended family here or any really. I find that the people that I really felt like loved by growing up were people from that school. Like even to this day, when I see them, how happy my old teachers or like people who maybe knew my family or whatever when I was younger, like that feeling when you run into people like that or the messages that I receive from like somebody from like my old classes, that kind of stuff. I don't know how to explain it. If you grow up with strong knit community, it adds value to your life. And I think, like I said, there is a dark side to it, but there's this feeling of like love and support that you just can't get otherwise from people who are not your blood. There's no other context in which you're going to feel that sense of caring for another person. I think human beings are so selfish. Like, I'm sorry, especially when I live in the US, I just see that so much. You know, people are like friendly and all that kind of stuff on the surface, but when it really comes down to it, I don't think that American culture really understands the meaning of community. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there are like certain parts of it I'm just not a part of. But yeah, more collectivist cultures, other cultures around the world, and the ones that I was exposed to, they have a different level of like hospitality and moral, like what you need to do for other people, right? Like give the shirt off your back to somebody else. Definitely not an American thing. So the next good thing that I want to talk about is education. This again is a double-edged sword one, but I think that there was something really great about being given tools at a young age. What I mean by that is like, I think kids should have the tools like understanding Arabic or being able to read Quran, because when they're older and they get older, they are able to use those tools and that education to make their own decisions and come to their own conclusions. What I've noticed a lot in the US and in particular is like you have a lot of Muslim kids who are like grown and don't have those basic tools and don't know how to do these basic things, but they do identify themselves as Muslim. But it can be really frustrating when you're an adult and you can't do things that are like very, as a Muslim, you would consider very simple, like being able to read Quran or like praying and all that kind of stuff. And as an adult, it just is harder to learn these things. And if you've learned these things really well as a kid, and I'm just saying this from like my observation, yes, people can raise their kids like that, but it's not the same like as a kid going to a actual school where they're learning it in their curriculum. It's not the same as going to Sunday school. And I remember I even signed up for an Arabic class when I was in college, and like the whole class was all these kids who didn't have that sort of formal education in terms of learning Arabic or whatever it may be. And so when they're all grown, they're going to like college and trying to get that same thing later in life. I just think that if you give people or children those tools early on, it's just going to benefit them. Like that's one thing I look back on, and I'm really thankful that I do have that base or whatever it may be. Okay, moving on to what I actually hated. Okay. Yeah, this is the controversial stuff. You ready? All right, let's get into it. Let's talk about religious trauma. Although I am thankful for the religious education I got, I also feel like I got a lot of trauma from that experience, which I'm still working through as an adult. I hate the word trauma. It's so overused, but it's such a perfect word that just describes so much. So for those of you who don't know what religious trauma is, I'll just define it real quick. But it basically refers to psychological distress stemming from harmful experiences within religious or spiritual context. So it can be like spiritual abuse, guilt-induced teachings, doubts about beliefs, conflicts with personal identity, and more. So in simple terms, it's basically having bad experiences associated with religion. It pushes you further away from it because of how it affects your mental health. Like, I'm a practicing Muslim. I really believe in Islam, but because I get triggered when I'm around like negative things that I hated from being around Muslims, I really have to work through that. And it's hard. So like, to give you an example, I used to get in trouble for like the stupidest things in the world. I'm not even kidding. Okay. Like, I wrote an essay about Michael Jackson. It became a whole lecture. It became a whole thing. Okay. The fear that I had when someone brought that up, because they were like, who? Michael Jackson is your role model? And I was like, nobody better snitch on me that it was me who wrote it. But it was like, why was I getting in trouble? Okay, that's a stupid example, but like maybe a better example is like, I got told by my 6th grade math teacher that if I burped out loud, I would be in hell for eternity burping. Like, she shamed me because I had burped. And looking back as a full grown adult, I'm like, why would you say that to a kid? Like, it's beyond me. Like, I don't understand why anybody would say that to a child. But it was like so many of those moments, right? I also really disagreed with the approach that people took in teaching us things at times. Like, I wish there was less of the fear-based guilt, you know, that was at such a young age. It wasn't right. And it pushes kids away from religion as they get older because they associate religion with negativity and negative stuff. And I also think some of the things when I was young were a little bit too hard for me to grasp. Like, I also witnessed some hypocrisy. Like, I think I mentioned this in a video not too long ago, but there was a teacher who pushed the girls in school to wear hijab. She forced the rule to be changed so that we would have to wear it earlier, right? So she made it so that fourth graders had to wear hijab with their uniform. This same woman, and I remember we were all really upset about this, okay? This same woman a few years later took her hijab off herself. So to me, there was like so much of that kind of stuff that now that I'm an adult, I can look back at a lot of this stuff. And, you know, as a child, I couldn't discern these things. I can see now, like, okay, these are adults. They were flawed. They did things that were like very odd. And so many people from different parts of the world came together in this school and had their own beliefs and were pushing that onto kids and had their own ideologies and thoughts. Like, I can step back and look at that now. But if you're just growing up in that environment, like, I can totally see why people would reject it because it creates religious trauma. I'm just going to leave it there. I don't know how else to like articulate myself better than that. I just disagree with a lot of the approaches. I think that, like I said earlier in the video, there's a difference between religious education that's like giving kids tools to go through life and also make their decisions as they get older. And there's a difference between that and like shaming kids and trying to indoctrinate them or like being negative or like if you're an adult and you're having a bad day, you just like, why would you make us wear hijab? Like, I don't understand that when you didn't wear it yourself. Make it make sense. Somebody make it make sense. Because it's like the people on social media who like to comment on hijabis and be like, you don't, I'm sorry, do any of you guys wear hijab? No, you don't. So what business do you have inserting yourself into the conversation? Zero. Sorry, you don't. As you can tell, I have some deep issues that I need to just release some things that I've been holding on to. Another thing that I kind of touched on was that I felt like there was a lack of perspective of different people or religions. Like, I think they could have done a better job of that. I went to a Catholic school in high school right after this school. There was a world religions class that was mandatory. So we learned about Islam at the Catholic school. I feel like we could have had the opportunity to learn about different types of Muslims, different schools of thought, different religions. And like, that was never something that we were given access to when I was younger that I remember. And I actually feel like we were actually taught a lot of misinformation about other people's religions and perspectives. And that's something that to this day, like, I don't agree with. And I don't think that that's a proper thing in education. All right. So one of the things that I didn't really like or I hated was that, you know, I talked a lot about how like the sense of identity and everything helped me connect with people and build community. And I felt these like strong ties with people. There was a opposite side to that as well. I actually found it hard and still kind of find it hard to connect with people who are outside. So personally, with my social anxiety and like me always being in small little like communities, it was hard when I left that school because I was in such a curated bubble. I don't feel like I developed the skills to connect with people who didn't have a shared identity with me. And I'm not going to lie, I'm a little bit like this. And I think what happens is you become a little bit offbeat and weird because of it. Like, I'm not sure that every Muslim kid who went to Islamic school ends up like this, but I think that identity gets drilled so deep into you that it can be hard to not use that as your filter as you move about the world. You forget how to like connect with people outside of that. I mean, I have made progress. I'm not saying that like I can't talk to people or make friends who don't have a shared identity because I have made friends. I do feel like sometimes for other people it's easier, I've noticed, than it is for me. Okay, so the last thing that I hate that I want to talk about, and I'm not going to talk about it too much because I already made videos about it. Arab supremacy. Okay, got me in a lot of trouble. I really hate that video. I wish I didn't do it, but it's too late. Yeah, so when I left that school, I left it with this feeling like I was less than for not being Arab. And regardless of what people say on the internet, I was made to feel that way, whether it was blatant bullying or more like subliminal message. I feel like I'm finally overcoming that, alhamdulillah. And honestly, it's the YouTube videos that have helped me like get through it. Surprisingly, I just wish I didn't like do all that on the internet. But you live and you learn. But yeah, like if you go to a school that's predominantly one race or one like type of people, like I kid you not, my sister told me a story of how one of her teachers literally said, all the Arab kids, come give me a hug if you're Arab. Like she didn't want the hugs from the other kids. Who? That kind of stuff would only happen at this school. Do you understand? That's like, okay, to put it in, like flip it and reverse it. All right, listen. So let's say like here in Texas, you have a class with like white kids, black kids, Mexican kids. And the teacher who is white is like, I want a hug from all the white children. Come give me a hug. If your parents were from Ireland or Italia, or please come give me a hug. That's odd. Is that not odd? But yeah, like when Mu'mina said that to me, I was like, oh, okay. I'm not making it up. Cool. Like I'm glad to be, because sometimes I'm like, am I making this up? No. So anyway, we're just gonna leave that there. But yeah, it was a thing. But in conclusion, also to answer the last question that I posed, I want my future children to have the tools for sure. I don't know if I would send them to an Islamic school. I'm not sure. I highly recommend it for the good experiences that I listed out, but going to an Islamic school, I don't think is the only way that you can achieve that. But on the other hand, I do think it's the only way that you can get the tools properly. So I don't know. I don't have an answer. But I think that I would definitely scope out a private school and try to do my due diligence to make sure that like some of those negative things that I talked about are not like super present in that environment. I do want, inshallah, my kids to like have a diversity of thought, you know? So we'll see. We'll see. That's pretty much all I have about my experience at Islamic school. I hope you enjoyed the video and I'd love to hear your guys' experience. I know there's probably a lot of you who also grew up in the US or whatever it may be and went to one of these schools, but I'd love to hear your experience, what your thoughts are. And I appreciate you guys as always. That's all I have. All right, TazzyPhe out. Bye.